injected with a mysterious substance. A man transforms into Captain France and faces off against Captain Germany on the WWI battlefield. Next, don't miss the gripping new French thriller, The Sentinel. A French soldier regains consciousness on the battlefield. Not far away, German troops who have invaded France are busy clearing the area. The soldier knows he must retreat to the rear positions before the enemy discovers him once spotted. He'll have no chance of survival. But just as he's only steps away from his own mine, he accidentally triggers a bouncing mine and is instantly thrown into the air by the blast. Before long, Gabriel wakes from unconsciousness. He sees several people in suits entering the hospital. One woman approaches a wounded soldier's bed and injects some unknown liquid into his body. The soldier immediately begins convulsing violently and falls still within seconds. The woman then walks to Gabriel's bed, rolls up his sleeve, and injects him with the same liquid. Gabriel reacts. Instantly, the black substance spreads through his veins throughout his body, and his eyes turn pitch black in an instant. He then loses consciousness and passes out. Shortly after, he's loaded onto a truck. When he opens his eyes again, he finds himself transported to a heavily guarded building. While frontline battles rage on, a bar in the suburban rear maintains its festive atmosphere. Deep inside the bar, in a private room, a clandestine transaction is underway. A German has come seeking to purchase intelligence about the French military's secret laboratory from the proprietor. Not only the building blueprints but also the guard shift schedules. The next day, the Baron locates his most capable agent, Seiler, and orders him to obtain the intelligence the Germans urgently need as quickly as possible. After the Baron leaves, Seiler takes out a photograph of a laboratory technician and uses his supernatural ability on it. With just this photograph, he can control the target's consciousness. Everything the subject sees and hears becomes as if Seiler were there himself. When the controlled technician walks past the wall, Seiler instantly captures the laboratory's blueprints and immediately sketches them onto paper. He then manipulates the man into entering an office, effortlessly locating the guard shift schedule. Just like that, he obtains the intelligence the Germans need. Meanwhile, the laboratory director, Miro, comes to the ward to explain to Gabriel why he was brought here. The military is researching a serum that can not only completely heal all injuries and illnesses, but also make the body far stronger than before. Gabriel will transform into a super soldier and join the Sentinel Special Forces unit to continue fighting the enemy. However, if the body cannot tolerate the serum, it will directly face life-threatening risks. So Miro gives Gabriel the choice of whether to participate in the experiment. Ultimately, Gabriel agrees to undergo the experiment. Researchers strap him to the bed, and once everything is ready, staff activate the switch and begin injecting the serum into his body. As the dosage gradually increases to maximum levels, his body begins convulsing uncontrollably. Seeing this, Professor Wick standing nearby picks up a gun, ready to end Gabriel's life at any moment. But before he can fire, gunshots suddenly ring out in the corridor. A German squad has broken into the laboratory during the guard shift chain. Upon receiving the news, Miro immediately orders all researchers to evacuate urgent, leaving only researcher Malt alone in the room, prepared to destroy experimental materials and related data at any moment. Moments later, a German soldier enters the room. Malt panics and quickly hides under the desk. The German soldier sees Gabriel on the bed, immediately raises his rifle, and plunges the bayonet into his body. Seeing no reaction, he prepares to move closer to investigate. But Gabriel suddenly opens his eyes, reaches out, and grabs the soldier's throat. The soldier dies of asphyxiation instantly. Several more soldiers then enter through the door. When they see their comrade dead on the ground, they immediately become more vigilant, but don't notice that Gabriel has appeared behind them. By the time they realize it, it's already too late. With the serum's assistant, Gabriel has become extremely ferocious in no time. He eliminates the entire squad of soldiers. Shortly after, support personnel finally arrive at the scene, but the German squad has long since escaped. Director Rick has been reduced to a charred corpse. When Miro hears the news of Gabriel's resurrection from death, he finds it hard to believe. Meanwhile, Gabriel, whose physical condition has not yet stabilized, sees an extremely bizarre vision in his mind. The fact that the German squad bypassed multiple defensive lines to raid the secret base indicates the enemy had obtained critical intelligence beforehand. So the most urgent priority now is to root out the mole inside the laboratory. The military has now confirmed that the leader of the attackers is none other than Gruber, a top German spy. In the laboratory, Gabriel's injuries have completely healed. Miro is preparing to send him to the Sentinel secret camp. But before departing, Gabriel requests to see his family one last time. Unexpectedly, Miro directly refuses this request, because at the official level, this is a classified project to ensure no secrets are leaked. Participants must completely sever all contact with the outside world. When Gabriel agreed to undergo the research experiment, Miro had already arranged for his death notice to be delivered to his wife. Only when the war ended could he reunite with his family. Reluctantly, Gabriel had no choice but to abandon his request and board the truck heading to the secret camp. Just as the truck departed, Inspector Bonner, responsible for investigating the mole, arrived at the laboratory under orders from high command. Meanwhile, German spy Gruber led his men to find the Baron, the bar owner, to assist Gruber's evacuation from France. The Baron specially prepared an ambulance and documents for passing through checkpoints. As Gruber and his men prepared to evacuate, Gabriel had already arrived at the Sentinel's secret camp. There he met three other super soldiers, Claremont, Armand, and Captain Djibouti, who was also the first to undergo the transformation into into a super soldier. However, the captain was full of resistance toward this new teammate. Though Gabriel had achieved numerous military accomplishments, he was notorious for his insubordination. The two clashed immediately upon meeting. Seeing this, Armand quickly pulled Gabriel away. Before long, the camp commander received an encrypted message from headquarters. The Germans planned to use aircraft transfer Gruber, the ringleader of the laboratory attack. The specific location had been confirmed. Headquarters ordered the Sentinel team to strike immediately and capture Gruber alive. At the laboratory, since the head researcher Rick had been killed by the enemy, his assistant Malter had taken over the subsequent research work. When he analyzed Gabriel's blood, he accidentally discovered an astonishing phenomenon. After the serum injection, Gabriel's blood had not expelled the serum from his body, but instead absorbed it completely, allowing the serum's activity to persist for a much longer time. Malter approached Miro, proposing to postpone Gabriel's mission execution time to observe his physical condition. Miro rejected Malter's proposal on the spot. However, while the two were conversing, the Sentinel team had already arrived near the German airfield. At the same time, Gruber successfully reached the airfield with his men, just as he boarded the airship waiting for takeoff. The Sentinel team had already infiltrated the hangar and launched an attack on the German guards. In the chaos, Gruber rushed out of the hangar, intending to escape using a small glider outside. But before he could climb onto the aircraft, Gabriel grabbed him and threw him to the ground, then delivered a barrage of iron fists to his face. At that moment, the serum's effects gradually manifested. The cells in Gabriel's body began to mutate. This transformation made him increasingly violent and completely out of control. Just as Gabriel was about to continue his attack, Armand suddenly arrived and stopped him. But Gabriel could no longer distinguish friend from foe. The uncontrollable power within him caused him to strike viciously at his comrade as well. Fortunately, Djibouti appeared in time. Under the restraint of his two teammates, Gabriel slowly regained his sense. Luckily, Gruber wasn't dead, so the Sentinel team could be considered to have successfully completed their mission. On the way back to camp, Gabriel's vision was once again filled with bizarre images in the barracks. A cameraman was using a movie camera to record the soldiers' daily life when suddenly, a monster clad in iron armor began massacring soldiers throughout the quarters. The cameraman chose not to flee but quickly turned the camera crank, using the equipment before him to document this horrific scene. That day, researcher Malter came to the secret camp to conduct comprehensive physical examinations on the super soldiers. As the first test subject, Djibouti's body was showing abnormal conditions. Due to prolonged serum injections, his heart function was gradually weakening. He frequently experienced shortness of breath and occasional hand tremors. Despite this, he chose to remain with the Sentinel team. Gabriel, meanwhile, had been seeing or hearing things that didn't exist at all. He suspected the serum's side effects were causing hallucination. Additionally, during the spy capture operation, he had suddenly become violent and difficult to control. These symptoms were likely all related to the serum, but Malter maintained that even the most violent chemical reactions could not change a person's fundamental character. He then took out a file folder from his bag containing materials he had collected about Gabriel's family medical history. Gabriel's father was violent by nature. When Gabriel was 7 years old, his father had beaten his mother to death with his fists. Gabriel was forced to separate from his father after that and had never seen him since. At that moment, the German spy Gruber, whom Gabriel had beaten and crippled, was undergoing interrogation. Colonel Miro knew very well that the German raid on the secret laboratory was not simply to sabotage the serum project. The enemy must also be conducting similar research. However, he didn't yet know the current progress of their research. Therefore, he intended to extract information about their experimental progress from Gruber. Unfortunately, Gruber had already resolved to die. No matter what torture Miro inflicted upon him, he never revealed even the slightest information related to the research. At that moment, Bonner, who was investigating the laboratory mole, entered the interrogation room. Gruber's capture was closely related to this matter. Moreover, as the highest level investigator, even Miro had no authority to obstruct his investigation. Miro had no other option but to leave the room with his men. News of Gruber's capture soon reached the Baron's ears. Should Gruber reveal his intelligence source, the Baron's life would be forfeit. With time running out, he had no choice but to turn to Sailor for help. He handed Gruber's photograph to Sailor, hoping he could use his supernatural abilities to assess Gruber's current situation. Using the photograph, Sailor quickly sensed Gruber's presence and slipped into his consciousness. At that moment, Gruber was being interrogated by Bonner. Just as he was about to break under torture and reveal the name, the Baron immediately ordered Sailor to silence him permanently. Before long, Miro's subordinates brought dire news. An outpost squad stationed in the outskirts had gone completely silent. It appeared the Germans were also advancing their super-soldier project in secret. Miro immediately dispatched the Sentinel squad on a reconnaissance mission. Upon arrival, the camp was eerily quiet. After gearing up and disembarking, the team discovered that all the soldiers in the camp lay dead on the ground, their deaths horrific. Inside the barracks, the scene was equally gruesome. During their search, Clement found a camera on the floor, while the others discovered the sole survivor, a cameraman, in a back corner. From his account, they learned that an armored monster had appeared at the site and slaughtered all the station soldiers. This creature not only possessed an impervious body, but also wielded the ability to control others' minds. Just as he finished speaking, Gabriel began showing abnormal symptoms once again. He heard that familiar yet sinister voice, Intelligence confirmed this individual was a German-developed super-soldier. The news immediately drew intense attention from the French Ministry of Defense. The minister personally convened an emergency meeting with military leaders to discuss countermeasures. The French military now faced a precarious situation and risked losing the war. The only way to turn the tide was to eliminate this super-soldier 8 that naturally fell to the Sentinel squad. Orders received. The team boarded trucks bound for the war zone. Meanwhile, Inspector Bonner entered Miro's office. The German spy previously captured by the Sentinel squad had died during his interrogation, and he needed to provide a reasonable explanation. According to the medical examiner's autopsy report, Dr. Gruber had died from sudden cardiac rupture, a shocking conclusion. Yet Bonner remained unusually composed, though he'd failed to extract the traitor's identity from the spy. His investigation seemed to have uncovered an even greater secret. At that moment, the laboratory was conducting experimental trials. As the switch closed, black serum slowly infused into a soldier's body. Staff members watched the instrument gauges intently. When the serum dosage reached maximum, the subject's heart could no longer bear the strain. Amid violent convulsions, black liquid began pouring from his mouth. Witnessing this, Mark retrieved a prepared pistol from a nearby cart. Suppressing overwhelming psychological pressure, he pulled the trigger. It was the first time in his life he'd actively taken another's life. The experiment had failed. Deeply discouraged, Miro could only place all his hopes on the Sentinel squad. The team had now reached the combat zone. Their destination was an abandoned chemical plant nearby. The squad leader intended to ask the commanding officer at the defensive position for the quickest route to the factory, but the soldiers warned them against going. There was a terrifying monster inside that hunted French soldiers specifically. These words stirred unease among the squad members. Fear was already spreading through the ranks. To restore and dispel the terror, they had to eliminate the creature everyone spoke of. After brief rest, they crossed through the woods and the chemical plant came into view. The team cautiously approached. Upon reaching the factory entrance, they were met with a horrifying sight: comrades' bodies scattered across the ground. The moment they entered the factory, they came under fierce, unexpected attack. Leveraging favorable terrain and overwhelming firepower, the enemy pinned down the Sentinel squad, making it difficult to find a breakthrough. During the intense firefight, Captain G.I. took a stray bullet to the abdomen. Thanks to the serum, he suffered no major injury for now, but if the standoff continued, his stamina would give out. He immediately ordered Gabriel and Clement to provide cover, while he and Armand circled around to the enemy's rear, planning a pincer movement. Under their teammates' covering fire, the two climbed stairs to a hideout. Midway through, G.I. finally collapsed from cardiac overload. To avoid disrupting the battle plan, he ordered Armand to proceed alone and rendezvous with the other two. Gabriel and his companion had also reached the tower. They spotted a soldier slumped against a pillar with a knife in his chest. Gabriel approached to check on him, when suddenly the sound of metal clanging came from behind. Both men immediately spun around, weapons trained, carefully searching for the enemy, but they'd forgotten the adversary could control minds. While they searched for their foe, the wounded soldier had already fallen under control. He slowly walked over, picked up a grenade, and under the enemy's command, pulled the pin. Hearing the explosion, Armand had no idea what was happening and could only press forward with his gun raised, completely unaware that the enemy had silently appeared behind him. At that moment, an eerie vision flashed before Gabriel's eyes. This time, the person in the vision was Armand. Realizing Armand was in danger, Gabriel shouted desperately, but the distance was too great. His cries went unheard. In the next instant, the enemy appeared behind Armand, and the two engaged in close combat. The disparity in strength proved overwhelming. Within moments, Armand was beaten to the ground. Seizing the opportunity, the enemy revealed a specialized steel blade mounted on his arm. Armand attempted to resist, but his opponent seized his arm and slowly drove the blade into his body. By the time Gabriel and the others reached the scene, they witnessed the enemy hurling Armand from the tower. When they arrived, Djibouti had already gotten there first. Thus ended the first encounter between the Sentinels and the German super-soldiers, a devastating defeat that cost them a comrade's life. The loss of his fellow soldier deeply affected Gabriel. Gazing at the photograph of his wife and child, he rose, dressed, and slipped away from the camp when no one was watching. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, Bonner was intently studying the notebook left behind by Gruber. The spy had been meticulous in his work, documenting everything he handled in detail. In his final entry before death, Gruber mentioned transporting a batch of supplies back to Germany. Yet Gruber's raid on the laboratory hadn't resulted in anything being taken. So what exactly had Gruber shipped out? At that moment, the bar owner, who had narrowly escaped after Gruber's death, found himself in a predicament. His most capable subordinate, Seller, had disappeared, along with Louis, one of the bar staff. As he puzzled over this development, Gabriel had already returned home. He retrieved the key from the electrical box, unlocked the door, and entered. Making his way to his room, he found his wife absent and their son sleeping peacefully in the crib. He walked slowly to the bedside and gently caressed his son's cheek, a smile gradually spreading across his face, one he hadn't worn in a long time. He wanted to linger with his child longer, but suddenly heard the sound of the door opening outside. The person returning was his wife, Irena. Hearing the noise, Gabriel immediately hid. Irena entered the room, checked on their sleeping child, then turned and left the house. Watching his wife come home only to leave again, Gabriel Milo was filled with confusion and decided to follow her to find out what was going on. What he didn't know was that after receiving the death notification, Irina had gone to the field hospital, hoping to see her husband's body one last time. Instead, she unexpectedly learned it from a nurse that Gabriel wasn't dead. He'd been taken away by someone under a Colonel Milo's command. As a journalist, Irina's instincts told her something unusual was afoot. She began using her credentials to investigate. Back at the laboratory, Bonner had made a new discovery. He had the body of scientist Rick X. Hume. After examining the charred corpse, he reached a shocking conclusion: the body wasn't Rick's. This meant the German soldiers' raid on the laboratory had been a kidnapping operation targeting Rick. Bonner's revelation sent chills down Milo's spine. If Rick fell into German hands, their Super-soldier program would advance rapidly. Before long, an army of Super-soldiers would sweep through the front lines, and within days, the French forces would be utterly defeated. The substitution of the scientist responsible for the Sentinel project alarmed the French Ministry of Defense. According to intelligence gathered by their department head, a high-level prisoner was indeed being held at Volkershausen prison in Germany, whose identity remained strictly classified. After analysis, they concluded this prisoner was most likely Rick, the scientist captured by the Germans. If Rick chose to cooperate, the Germans could create a Super-soldier squad within weeks. By then, France would cease to exist, but this was merely speculation. They dared not be complacent and formulated an action plan accordingly. Returning to camp, Milo quickly assembled the Sentinel squad and conveyed the Ministry of Defense's orders. Their mission objective was Volkershausen prison. According to intelligence, Rick would be transferred to another location in 2 days. Therefore, the Sentinel squad had to locate Rick within that time frame and bring him back safely. The mission was extremely difficult, virtually a suicide mission. For this reason, Milo spoke with Gabriel privately. Given his unique physical condition, Gabriel was the one most likely to complete the mission alive. Milo promised him that upon successful completion, he would be reunited with his family. Shortly after, the team members boarded trucks heading for the combat zone at the border. Meanwhile, the Germans were also making moves. Diane, the German spy who had taken over Gruber's work, approached the Baron again, handing him a portrait. He wanted to know everything about the man in the picture. In exchange, he would help the Baron find Seller. The man in the portrait was Gabriel. In the laboratory, Bonner continued hunting for the mole. As his investigation deepened, he inadvertently uncovered another top-secret project. This was the Atlas project, initiated even earlier than the Sentinel program, yet Mark knew nothing about it. Before long, however, Bonner was summoned to the general's office. Under the general's firm directive, he was removed from the laboratory investigation. The moment Bonner left, Milo received troubling news. Gabriel's wife was gathering information everywhere, planning to write an expose about the secret laboratory. Meanwhile, the Sentinel team had quietly infiltrated enemy territory. They first hijacked a military vehicle and changed into enemy uniforms, then drove toward the prison. Along the way, they unexpectedly encountered a German checkpoint. Faced with German interrogation, Claremont engaged them in fluent German, assuming this would allow them to pass through undetected. To his surprise, the officer in charge of the checkpoint insisted on confiscating the supplies in their vehicle. Just as a soldier was about to open the cargo bay, the team members launched a preemptive attack. After intense gunfire, all soldiers stationed at the checkpoint were killed. However, during the firefight, Claremont was unfortunately shot in the abdomen. His injury added another layer of difficulty to an already challenging rescue mission. Gabriel then drove away from the checkpoint at high speed, with a critically wounded comrade on one hand and a mission vital to their nation's fate on the other. Every member of the Sentinel team was consumed with anxiety. Just then, a house appeared by the roadside. With Captain Djibouti's approval, Gabriel stopped the vehicle in front of it. He carried Claremont out, and the two decided to treat their comrade first, before proceeding with the mission. They rushed inside, and Gabriel immediately helped Claremont lie flat on a table. Upon inspection, aside from a mother and daughter, there was no one else in the house. The two prepared to extract the bullet from Claremont, but Djibouti's hand holding the knife kept trembling. Seeing the struggling, screaming soldier, the elderly woman wanted to help. However, no one but Claremont understood German. Unable to communicate, the woman extended her hand proactively. Djibouti seemed to sense her goodwill and handed her the knife. With the woman's help, the bullet was successfully extracted. To avoid delaying the rescue mission, Djibouti had no choice but to leave Claremont temporarily in the care of the elderly woman. Back at the laboratory, Milo was still awaiting news from the Sentinel team. What worried him more was that if this mission failed, he would lose the general's trust and the Sentinel program would be immediately terminated. To prepare for this possibility, he had his subordinate Eddie N continue recruiting test subjects while maintaining surveillance operations. The subject of Eddie N's surveillance was none other than Gabriel's wife, Irina. Using her personal connections, she had repeatedly purchased various intelligence from a Department of Defense employee. Among this intelligence was information related to Colonel Milo. Clutching the documents, Irina sought out the dancer Roxanne, asking her to identify people in the photographs. While reviewing the photos, a foreign soldier named Chabon caught Roxanne's attention. She was certain this was the person she had seen 10 years ago, yet the file clearly stated that Chabon had died in Morocco in 1904. How could he have appeared on the streets of France 10 years ago? Meanwhile, the bar owner, Baron, obtained Gabriel's information through his police contact and promptly handed it over to the German spy, Diane. As a gesture of good faith, Diane informed Baron about about Seal Ray's whereabouts. Just as Lewis was about to trade with someone else, Baron led his men to the bridge underpass. He intended to extract information about who wanted to purchase Seal Ray, but unexpectedly, the other party had backup. After intense crossfire, the opposing party escaped entirely. Lewis wasn't so fortunate. Baron shot and crippled his leg. Just as Baron was about to finish him off, Seal Ray stepped forward to plead for his life. After a moment's hesitation, Baron lowered his gun. At the laboratory, Milo, pushing to advance research progress, brought back a female prisoner named Arya from jail. The experiment on Arya had to begin before the Sentinel team returned from their mission. If the experiment succeeded, she would be Milo's last lifeline. Simultaneously, under cover of night, the Sentinel team infiltrated the prison holding Rick. Upon arrival, Gabriel immediately sensed something was wrong. There wasn't a single guard at the entrance. But with time running out, they had no choice but to take the risk. They entered the prison and began searching for Rick's cell. Just as they reached the quarter corner, a light suddenly illuminated ahead. German Super- soldiers had been waiting for them all along. They became prisoners. Shortly after, a German Super- soldier entered their cell and removed his helmet. Gabriel never could have imagined that the enemy standing before him was his own father, Shaboan. Meanwhile, at the laboratory, the modification experiment had begun. Once the serum was injected, the instrument needles exceeded the experimental value limits. A staff member immediately walked to a nearby cart, retrieved a prepared handgun, and handed it to Mort. According to previous experimental protocols, test subjects who developed complications were to be executed on the spot. But this time, Mart didn't take the gun from his assistant. As time passed, the death row inmate let out a final scream before falling completely silent. Staff members cautiously approached to check the situation. They ultimately confirmed the subject was still alive. Everyone present breathed a sigh of relief. All they could do now was wait. Before long, Arya regained consciousness in the hospital room. He slowly emerged from the room and made his way into the corridor outside, where he ran into the doctor and soldiers behind him. But empowered by the serum, Arya easily took control of the soldiers. Hearing the commotion, Malt rushed over and immediately ordered the guards to lower their weapons. After all, Arya was the first super soldier he had successfully created. Meanwhile, Gabriel was about to face a brutal test. Determined to transform his son Gabriel into the same cold-blooded killer he was, Shaban brought Djibouti directly before him and handed him a dagger. If he eliminated the comrade standing before him, there would be no turning back. But Gabriel couldn't bring himself to do it. He struggled desperately to suppress the dark force within him, yet couldn't break free from Shaban's mind control ability. Under Shaban's manipulation, he lunged at Djibouti. Just as the dagger was about to fall, his wife's voice echoed repeatedly in his ears. The power of love ultimately awakened his humanity. At the same time, a soldier entered the prison and encountered Djibouti being escorted out of his cell. Djibouti glanced up and discovered that the soldier before him was none other than Claremont, their previously injured comrade. The two then joined forces to take down several guards. After retrieving their equipment, they headed straight for the cell holding Gabriel. Claremont put a helmet on him and administered the serum. Under its effects, Gabriel's strength was instantly restored. The three then officially launched their rescue operation. From a captured guard, they learned the location of the cell holding Cree. During their withdrawal, the Sentinel squad engaged in intense confrontation with the prison guards. Shaboan, who had been recovering his strength through the serum, was jolted awake by the alarm. By this time, several Sentinel team members had already broken out of the prison. Thanks to Claremont's careful preparation, Cree safely boarded the truck. The moment the truck started, Gabriel jumped into the cargo bed. After shaking off their pursuers, Claremont pulled the vehicle over to the roadside. The group then proceeded on foot across the Franco-German border. But as soon as they entered the combat zone, Gabriel heard Shaban's voice in his ears. This was no hallucination. He knew Shaban had caught up with him. With the situation critical, Djibouti entrusted Claremont with the task of escorting Rick, while he and Gabriel stayed behind to intercept Shaban. As soon as Claremont left, Shaban set foot on the scorched earth. The two men put on their helmets, loaded their serum, and prepared for a fight to the death. Sharing the same bloodline, Gabriel's abilities were in no way inferior to Shaban's, yet he couldn't break free from the mental restraints. Shaban deliberately created visions in his mind of his comrades being killed, causing Gabriel to lose his fighting capability instantly. Seizing this opening, Shaban broke away to launch an attack on Djibouti. Within a few exchanges, Djibouti found himself pinned against a wire frame. Shaban wrapped wire around one of his hands, intending to torture him to death on the spot. Djibouti grabbed a magnetic bomb nearby and tossed it at Shaban's feet. The violent explosion sent both men flying. Though Shaban sustained no external injuries, his strength was more than half depleted. Djibouti miraculously survived but lost an arm. Shaban then picked up an iron rod and walked toward Djibouti. Just as he was about to strike, Gabriel rose from the ground. He immediately deployed his manipulation ability and seized control of Shaban's consciousness. Under the pressure of this overwhelming force, Shaban crashed heavily to the ground, but still unwilling to concede. He tried to get up and continue resisting. Before he could, Gabriel rushed forward, snatched the iron rod from his hand, and struck him with a devastating blow. In the next second, Gabriel drove the rod through his throat. Then Djibouti approached and gripped the other end of the rod. Together, they twisted with force, successfully bringing down the German army's myth of invincibility once and for all. In the laboratory, Malt turned Miro's trust through his success in creating a super soldier. He then made a request to Miro. he wanted access to the Atlas Project files. Given that Molt was now the only person available, Miro granted his request. Atlas was the original project of the Sentinel program to create super soldiers. Miro had gone so far as to conduct live experiments on 400 soldiers. Learning the truth, Molt was horrified. Suppressing his inner rage, he walked out of the office. No sooner had he left than Adrian entered, informing Miro of the successful rescue of Rick. At the same time, he brought bad news. Gabriel's wife, Irina, had ignored the threats and continued her investigation. She had even contacted a former laboratory employee and arranged to meet that evening. If she had managed to find someone connected to the laboratory, it meant she already knew too much. Miro had no choice but to order Adrian to eliminate Irina before the two could meet. Meanwhile, the German spy Diane had also located the Baron, hoping he could help with a certain matter. That evening, Adrian arrived downstairs at Irina's building. A man carrying a bag happened to emerge from the building. Watching him walk away, Adrian clutched his knife and slowly climbed the stairs. When he pushed open the door and entered the apartment, he found Irina already on the floor with a stab wound to her abdomen. Seeing this, he immediately turned and left. The man with the bag had already returned to the Baron's side, and inside the bag was Gabriel's child. The Baron then handed the child over to Diane. Gabriel returned from completing his mission. Without time to receive commendations, he rushed home on his motorcycle. He had thought he could finally reunite with his family, but when he pushed open the door and entered, he found his wife lying in a pool of blood.